started right away because I know this young man has lots to say, and we can take a look at his wonderful art that's outside in the Loft gallery this month. We're going to talk today to Paul Weyand, who is an artist extraordinaire, prolific painter, and also seeing sculpture for the first time. So I'm glad he brought some of that along. Just a quick bit about Paul. He was born in Athens County, and he was born in the house in which he lived. So that's I'm sure there's at least 10-minute story to go along with that. He attended Ohio State and has several degrees in social sciences, and began taking classes here at the Cultural Arts Center around 2006. So he's been taking classes here ever since, after his retirement. He had about 15 painting classes he took at OSU, so he learned a lot from the OSU world. And I would add that he has a very unique style of painting, as we're going to discover here, in which he is influenced by quite a few artists, contemporary and some of the modernists, including Picasso, Matisse, Rubens, Kirchner, and what was the?
Tamara de la Pica.
I can read my writing. Tamara de la Pica, and Lucien and Sigmund Freud. So there's a lot
different levels.
Yes. So there's a lot of great information that Paul's going to share with us. And if you would please welcome Paul Weyand.
Okay, I have about 33,000 possible intros, but based on the fact that I am basically self-diagnosed as attention deficit disorder, I tend to pretty much talk in that manner and think in that manner, which is also kind of I guess, stream of conscious a little bit. But I've got some things here that I will try to direct through and get through what we can. I told a former colleague yesterday that I'm going to try to do in an hour what I think would conservatively be a course and maybe a whole discipline almost. But anyway, we'll see what we can get here. First of all, the school I taught at had a kind of a mission statement, but the most meaningful part of that for me is the part about being a lifelong learner. And in that sense, I taught for 35 years, and I would say during the time I was teaching, I was doing more learning than probably teaching. And my general philosophy, as I usually told students on the first day, is don't let me get in the way of you learning. Whatever is best for you, your style. I know that personally I'm very visual, so I always would start out with kind of some general things I wanted to cover written on the board, so that for me, I need to see words sometimes, because listening right now, I'm sure some of us, it's like, whoop, it just kind of goes through. Same way with names. If I almost have to see your name in print, or again, it's just like, as soon as you tell me, it's already gone. So eventually, in like my classes, studio classes, I write down people's names in class and put them in my pocket and then look at it a couple times. Then I think it's important to know my classmates' names, for instance. I was a bad student in school, which, you know, I think it's important to mention as a teacher. But by being a bad student, I'm talking primarily about doing my assigned lessons. Because I had good intentions, I meant to do them, but as soon as I started, I eventually quickly went off in a tangent. And one of the things I did a lot as a young person was I would just on my own visit dictionaries, and I had a 1964 set of Americana encyclopedias that my mother got at the World's Fair. and I would look up things constantly. Now, that has probably changed. We finally got rid of those, which is kind of a problem for me. But now I spend a lot of time probably Googling and looking if I want to know how to varnish, for instance, a painting. I'm YouTubing. YouTubing. So anyway, I wanted to also say that it's impossible for me to totally explain what I've done, what my art is. So I wanted to quote Isadora Duncan, okay, the dancer, the modern dancer. One of her quotes is, "If I could tell you what it meant, there would be no point in me dancing it." So in other words, my ability to transform or transfer between paintings and language is very challenged. I do think of art as one way of being my voice, I guess. And one of my favorite authors, whom I think has a beautiful mastery of the English language, which I enjoy reading, but personally, it's not the way I probably work within that, is Tom Robbins. And for any artist or person, period, Tom Robbins says, "Be your own master." And so I think every human being should be to thine own selves be true first, Okay, this, I tried to, I don't know if I'll do this ever again. I don't know. So I thought, what's the goal of my exhibition other than just putting my things out? And that is I wanted to honor models, okay? Because I guess I don't think models receive enough reward. A few of them become what in human terms we might label as immortal, but other than that, they don't make much money. They're oftentimes looked down upon. Maybe the mythology is sometimes accurate, but most of the time, models, again, work by any means necessary. And so I have read some books recently on modeling, and at first I was having trouble finding any, but then I started finding more. And I was hoping to be able to get a model to come in here and speak for themselves, but I don't think a lot of their schedules were convenient, and so we don't have that. But I will get to some kind of things that I investigated about models. Okay, so I do have down some reasons I respect models. One of which is I would make an argument if I had time, might be a course, and how models might be the center of the universe. And I know I listened to Paul Sutter, the astrophysicist from Ohio State some, and he talks about how whether or not we're meaningful. And that's a matter of opinion. But the universe that we have measured at this point is supposedly about 92 billion light years across. But I still contend, as some of our mistaken scientists of the past, that we still are the center of the universe. And my reason is, the reason we're the center of the universe is because we say it is. This is the way that we perceive the universe. We perceive the universe from right here. And so what do we see most and focus on the most, whether you think it or not, is people. Okay? And so anyway, that being the case, I think it's legitimate that I've spent some time focusing on human form, or life form. And we do have 3 classes of Life Studio here. and they are offered other places in around town.
Paul,
Yeah.
could you talk then historically about models and like why?
Okay.
Yeah, why?
Good point.
From a historical standpoint.
Yeah. Okay.
Why were models important?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to jump off that already just a tiny bit to women, because this is also, it's model women. This is opposed to, I cannot be the leader of women, but I can certainly support, and that's kind of one of my missions of this. And so throughout history, we can look at women in history, and there were times when women, you could contend, were in better shape in some ways than they are today, in some ways. If you look historically at women, okay, if you go back, there were female pharaohs, and there were several places around the world, ancient world, pretty much in every continent, women were looked upon as goddesses. And I mean, and the goddess, like with a capital G and a capital T. And we eventually came around to having paternal images of God. But I think that if we really did a complete anthropological study and historical study, we would find more women as the creator, which they are, and also biologically, but to modeling. Okay, let me get to modeling now. Okay, good point. Basically, from what I think is a common understanding, please argue with me if you have other information, okay, for a lot of reasons. Number one, I could not research every issue of this, but my understanding is that basically models go back, to some of the first, at least civilizations that we're familiar with. And commonly, at least like some of the most common, obviously there were models involved in like some of the Egyptian and Greek and Roman, there are examples of where models were used. But in some of those, the models were almost entirely for a whole period were male. Just like all of the actors were male. And some of these, that's part of the Western civilization. I can't speak entirely for what I would call probably African and Asian, but in Western, which is basically the way we've all been educated, whether we like it or not, mostly the model was a male. I guess around, I think in like 16th century, in the time of the Renaissance, we started having some art schools. Art schools didn't exist formally before then. There were artists, but there weren't art schools. So they started having these art academies, and at first, again, they were all male. Okay? And eventually some, well, we all know that there were artists who used female models, and even in the time period of some of the not necessarily modern times, they sometimes had to have models come to their home because the public did not accept female nudity in a public sense. So they had to work at home. So what does that lead to? Well, it led to a couple babies, for one thing. And it also led to all kinds of public discussion about models, women going to, houses, and what might go on there. And obviously a lot of famous stories about some of those relationships that some of us have heard about. But eventually, modeling came big throughout, I guess mostly Italy, France, and I guess England primarily, and Europe, and then finally got to the United States probably in the 1800s. Okay, so it's a fairly new phenomenon, and still though, the point is from the very beginning, with modeling. There may be a couple of exceptions, but generally speaking, models, like I said, were looked down upon, didn't get paid well. You know, on that note, I've read a whole bunch about current modeling, and so I asked one person recently about, I was concerned because this person had all these part-time jobs that were trying to tie together to get by, and I do mean get by. But I also want to say the person I'm talking in particular is probably more of an artist in many ways than any of us here, probably, because this person does art on all these different stages, and some of them are stages, okay? And so I don't think this person would mind if I went over some of the things this person does. This person does do acting. This person does probably do stage production. I mean, what are we talking about? Building the stage,
Set design.
set and all that, set work. And yeah, they'll run around in black clothes and grabbing everything, moving around. This person is works at Children's Hospital as kind of therapy for some of the children that are, you know, there for chemo and various things. In a type of an acting type situation again. This person, along with some other people, are clowns, and I don't mean scary clowns. I mean clowns that go around to nursing homes and various people that just kind of, you know, add a little bit of life to some people's kind of settings, you know. This person is an acrobat. This person does all these different jobs in modeling. And I'm going to also say right up front, you could not meet a finer person than this person as a citizen of the world. You know, somebody that's like cares about everybody, and that's part of her mission. Her mission is to some degree to basically, it gives her joy to, you know, bring things to other people. I asked her, I was concerned about her having health care, though. How can you have health care if you don't have a full-time job? And she said, government gives me health care. I'm like, what do you mean? She said, I make so little money that under the Affordable Care Act, I pay nada to get health care. So at least in that sense, you know, although I don't think she sometimes visits those health things as much as maybe she should, but there's where she is.
So Paul, sorry to,
No.
so then for you, in terms of subject matter,
Yes.
the model versus a bowl of fruit.
Yes, exactly.
In terms of subject.
Good
So
point. Yeah.
how does that work with you?
Okay. Excellent point. Maybe I haven't investigated that entirely myself. Well, a couple reasons. One is entirely what I would call my intuitive side, my inner self, in that I've done Myers-Briggs a couple times, and if you know anything about Myers-Briggs, it tells where you are on the type of personality. My answers, even though I did it more than once, came out that I was extreme analytical, extreme, way, way out there, and I was extreme feeling intuitive. And so guess what? That's one of the reasons that I have attention deficit, because I'm always arguing with myself. It's like one's pulling me one way, and one's pulling the other way. One wants to be controlling, the other one wants to just let it go. Okay? So basically, why I'm here partly is because a couple times in my life, I made a decision and decided to stick to it, which is very uncommon for me to stick to something, because usually I can quickly go somewhere else. So I said, I love some of my friends who are musicians, because they sat down and practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced one thing. Albert Einstein could not play in the NBA. Okay? And LeBron could not, you know, be an astrophysicist at this point. Okay? But the point is I decided that I needed to try to stick to something, including, I mean, I did ceramic sculpture, which becomes, this is pretty surreal in many ways. It's a person with their feet up, and one big toe is an eye, and the other big toe is an eye for this person. That goes on the wall, by the way, and it's got faces in the foot and all kinds of stuff going on, which just kind of happens. Can we pass that? Yeah. It's pretty heavy. So
what I enjoy is
maybe you.
when artists can transfer an idea or a style from one medium to the next. So this is so relational to the paintings. And it's not, you can tell it's the same artist creating that same piece of work in a different way. So I think that's very successful and hard to do for a lot of folks too.
So Paul, you didn't tell us what's your Myers-Briggs letters?
Oh, I don't remember that. I don't remember the letters. Yeah, you're right. There's 4 letters, right? Yeah. I could probably dig that out somewhere, but yeah, I don't have it right now. Good point. I didn't know how many people were real familiar with Myers-Briggs other than its personality. I mean, it's considered to be a pretty detailed personality test, I suppose, some real simple ones. It's supposed to be more accurate. But anyway, why this? I decided that I needed to specialize in something, and it was something that was inside of me, and that is the human form. Okay, and mostly painting, mostly. Although I have a lot of like soft pastels, a whole lot of them. I didn't put any in this. Just like theoretically, I didn't put any three-dimensional in. I've got more three-dimensional. I got larger. I got different varieties a little bit. But one of the reasons I quit the three-dimensional is purely because it's three-dimensional. And I only have so much space, or anybody only has so much. Now this little sculpture, one of the reasons this is little is because that's kind of the size of our bronze facility when it's working. And we can pass this around. This is, I would say, a little bit towards Henry Moore, but mine is a little more directly figurative than Henry Moore. If you know Henry Moore, his gets more abstract. But this is relatively abstract, but there's definitely a human form in there. And it's got a contortion a little bit, which in modeling there's an Italian name, kind of a contra pasta. Okay, yes. Okay, which is kind of that, and I kind of like things with a twist. Although it's another part about being modeling. When you get done modeling, you might have to go to the chiropractor or the masseuse. I mean, immediately after. But one model also related it to doing yoga, though. She said she's getting paid to do yoga. I'm like, okay, you know, because you're getting a workout, an actual workout. She said, including laying down. She said, just like me, I can't lay in one place in my bed at night. Right? I'm all over the place. And so a lot of us are the same way. It's like, what? Oh, how hard could it be laying still? Well, to do it for 20, 30 minutes at a time, then go back to the same exact space. And if you don't do it exactly, Dan, who used to be a friend of mine, would tell the model, you need to move this, you need to do that. Now, I'm going to also relate another thing about Life Studio. First of all, the Life Studio is, I think, one of the safest places to be in the world is a Life Studio. Everybody there is on the, I think, that I've experienced so far, is like on the highest level of respect most of the time. Now, occasionally an accident happens, like one time I violated one of the rules of the relationship between artist and model, and Susan outed me immediately, who was my instructor. I touched the model. Now, I've touched models a lot of times out of class because I'm a hugger person, and they are cool with that, then good, because, I don't know, they're part of my family. But anyway, the point is a model, we were saying how she was supposed to have her arm, and I'm like, you know what? Susan was trying to tell her, I was trying to tell her it wasn't getting across. I'm like, so I like moved her arm. And then Susan went off. You know, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. No, I shouldn't have. But then the model told me afterwards, okay. But as a matter of fact, well, there's a piece I heard called Touche, and that's kind of named after that incident where I touched the model during class when we were trying again to get back into the pose. But there are a lot of unspoken rules, as well as usually in the first day of class there's a sheet that goes out saying what's allowable and what's not. And in this day and era, probably the number one thing is probably no photos. Okay? Occasionally, though, I have had models that requested we take their photo, and that's a little unusual. But generally speaking, there's an unspoken kind of respect. And in reading about some models, they usually talk about the very first time they model about how they're kind of apprehensive and kind of a little concerned about, first of all, being nude and taking their clothes off in front of a bunch of strangers. But number two, just whether they can live up to the responsibility. But they generally say that, like, after the first session, a lot of the things, the stereotypes that they might have about what it would be like are completely, like, done away with, like, in one session. I've got some research again about from a psychology site talking about how some people are encouraged to do modeling so they have a better self-image and better body image of themselves. Because typically speaking, people who have a conscious concern about that, supposedly in many cases modeling, like the way they're accepted allows them to feel better about themselves. One model said that she was afraid to look at everybody's work until one time she got up, took her a few sessions to get up enough nerve to go back and look. And so when she did, she went to the first painting or drawing, and she said, "Oh, I'm not that wide or thick or big-boned or whatever the term might be." And then she went to the next person. She said, "Oh, that's too thin." And then she finally realized, you know what? All these are interpretations. They're interpretations and flaws or whatever, but the main thing is I describe these as interpretations. I also describe these as dreams. And part of the reason they're dreams are my background. I basically always have a background except for Nikki here. Nikki here doesn't have a background, what I call background, other than maybe some warmth, and again, there's some warmth on this side over here, partly to put some highlight on this side of the face. It's just kind of supposed to be that way. Okay? So anyway, a lot of I have some themes that I don't even consciously think of normally. One of them, this one over here. One of the themes is maybe journey. This is one that's got, well, you can tell, it's got a railroad kind of tie going down to the bottom. Railroads often make it into my work. And I guess I didn't necessarily intend it to be a journey, but one I have out here that's got another one, I call it time machine, or wait a minute, time traveler. In other words, a person can be going forward into the future or going back on some type of transportation. So it's got that down at the bottom. Oh, this one's also got waterfalls for some reason coming out of the chair, which is, the chair became blocked. And it's got waterfalls on both sides that the model's saying are in the middle. It's got a whole bunch of eyes for a variety of reasons. It's got, I don't know, it's got a whole bunch of jungle going on, partly because my mind in the real world is, I live in a city, but even when I look out at the park, I mean, when I look out there, you know, there are trees out there, and I've got the skylight outside several of my paintings. I guess at least one out there, or two.
Is that your studio?
Well, that's kind of my, well, to tell you the truth, some of that is the studio downstairs. It's got the pipes up at the top up here. It's got, oh, the window. Yeah, and I sometimes put, there's a sheet usually in front of it, but you can see the paint through it sometimes. So this one is from the studio downstairs, but within that studio, some wild stuff happens sometimes. Wild, I mean, truly wild and natural. And some of it, again, is the human mind. Eyes and faces. There's, you know, some of these eyes become faces, and a lot of faces come in mind. I have to be honest. When I say themes, one is the journey. Another one is music. This one's got piano. There's several with music in. Well, this one too. This one's got music running in it. That one on the right is fairly abstract for me, but sometimes things go abstract. But in there, I also have an apple and a peach that the model is holding. Because fruit is another thing. I don't typically do still lives per se, but fruit is, again, part of the natural world. And to be honest, I guess fruit can also imply fertility, and that's probably part of, it's definitely at least a subconscious part of what goes on. I think of my art also as partly my personal genetics, but I also look upon a little bit of Carl Jung's collective subconscious. I think in our brains, all of our brains, we have some of the same things that happen, and sometimes whether we like it or not, they appear. They can appear in a daydream, a dream, whatever. And so, those are common things that are in there in my paintings. Jungles, railroads. Another real reason I put railroads in is I grew up by a railroad. And I remember I had a few dreams where the train came off the track and was chasing me in my dream and stuff. So railroads are in there, but I look upon railroads as kind of a romantic thing too, and a nostalgic type thing. But also because Sirico, or the Italian surrealist, had, his father was an engineer or something, so he often have a train in the distance with some puffs of smoke coming out. But okay,
Paul, can you talk about how you choose your palette, your color palette? How do you choose that?
Can I ask that a different way? Talk
Yes.
to me about this amazing
Yes.
thing.
that one, oh yeah.
I love that.
This is a particular palette chosen to honor one of my favorite artists, who is Kirchner. And one of the reasons he's one of my favorites is I love his style and the fact that he violated rules of palette and of maybe color theory a little bit. And I love the concept of color theory, but I would love to argue it with anybody who teaches it. And I also know that in color theory, okay, wait a minute, German poet and, no, come on here. Goethe, thank you. Garrett was not just a poet, he was a scientist, and it's kind of like Thomas Jefferson type person, except he didn't have slaves. I don't think. That's the new thing with Thomas. I never knew that before, did you? Oh, anyway, it's come up recently. But anyway, Garrett scientifically kind of proved that basically magenta was part of the rainbow, because mathematically it's there. And now I think it has a truer form of red for artists. Magenta is closer than cadmium or crimson or any of those. So anyway, Kirchner used some of these colors. He just liked using outrageous colors. So I did this. To be quite honest, Kirchner has one something like this with this, I don't know why, it seems like he's got a Samoan or something in the background here or something. But he had one of these in a painting, and so this is a model from our classes that also looks like A.J. Vanderelli a little bit in the face. Vanderelli is an artist in Columbus, and so
Does
somehow
she know that?
she what?
Does she know that you think that?
No, I will see her tomorrow though, probably, so I may bring it up. But anyway, she has a, if you don't know A.J. Vanderelli, if you like art, you need to know her. I think she's one of the most important art facilitators in the city. She introduces a lot of new artists, to the whole art community. And she also she's done all kinds of like art therapy for, groups, and she does all kinds of amazing things in her little studio, which is just down the street. So you need to get there sometime. So Kirchner is also one of my favorites because he was one of Hitler's degenerate artists. And so that's one of the reasons I like him. So I borrowed a lot of kind of his kind of palette. But I don't know if my palette does kind of like evolve sometimes, like supposedly Picasso had a blue period or something. Susan knows my palette as well as anybody over a long period of time, but it does have some complementaries in it, which is partly, some of this might be a little bit Susan's influence. This is a little bit towards Susan's style, but she does primarily watercolor, but she does other things. But anyway, this is just basically violet and yellow. I mean, it's a very deep yellow, but it is yellow. And the other thing this one has, that some of my other stuff is, just playing with a marker. So it's got a lot of marker in it. That sometimes the marker is there first, sometimes it gets put on last, sometimes it's put on first and last, but in terms of marker. So anyway, sometimes the cosmos does enter too. Here's a dual ringed planet along with some notes. Sometimes notes and cosmic bodies, well, I think they are related. And that's another part of my whole theory of art and life, is that everything is interconnected and interrelated, and we are all one. And I think there's too big of a distinction made between organic and inorganic. I think we're all, and I know it sounds a little Buddhist, and I didn't set out to be Buddhist, but it's not entirely Buddhist because I haven't studied Buddhism more than on a minor scale. This one is several of my pieces have a thing where patterns start to happen between the model and the background. And part of this is I like patterns, and I like sometimes I like to have angular and curvature, and I like having I guess Matisse in particular had a lot of background, but she she somehow or other, oh, there's a quilt, and the quilt has some of this kind of pattern, and so she becomes part quilt. And sometimes it works the other way. The model becomes part of the quilt, or vice versa. And then that gets into the idea of reflection. And reflection, again, I will say that reflection can be completely honest, and it can also obviously distort, you know. So the other thing about reflection I want to say is, again, with the cosmos, is that I think that there is a song that goes on in the cosmos between, again, organic and inorganic, and everything that moves in the universe and all that, I relate to a vibration, which is kind of one of the definitions, I guess, of song or sound. Let's see. I'm finding another theme or anything here.
Well, if I could
Yeah,
ask,
absolutely.
so your style, it looks like there's a lot of course, a lot of gesture. You said
Yeah.
marker. They look like a lot of very quick marks and quick decisions. But tell us about your process and how long you work on a piece. Do you work on multiple pieces at once?
I should work on multiple pieces at once. What happens lots of times is I begin something and set it aside, then I come back. One out here, I drew and didn't paint for 10 years. I drew it and I didn't paint it for 10 years. That was like when I first started my art gig. And I have to tell you a little bit about my art gig, I guess. When I was young, I was interested in everything. And that was part of my just natural curiosity, but also probably part of my attention deficit. But I know in the 9th grade I was president of the art club and the science club. And to some extent, they're opposites, but in some degrees they're not. And another part of me, which is I sometimes equate to being on the German side of Alsace-Lorraine and over there, and then the French side, depending upon which side of the stage I'm on. Anyway, I feel like I have, again, this kind of thing between being controlling and being, letting things happen. Like one of the things that I've got written down here in a journal entry was about when the paint hits, once the paint hits the canvas, I try to let the paint go where it wants to. And just like I told my students, I try to get out of the way. And things kind of happen. But I sometimes have things in mind, and I'm not sure exactly where this piece came from, except it is part of this goddess thing that is supposedly part of my show. I've got one out there that it's got Athena in, but Athena is supposed to represent anybody. This is kind of Kali, although I call it goddess of dance. But it's also kind of the Indian with the multi-arms. And the reason that I think I liked it is because I think of everything as being part of a dance and a song, and to some degree. And so the fact that the model is supposedly stationary is in some ways necessary, but it's nothing is really stationary in the universe, right? So like we're spinning around this way and flying that way and doing all these things at the same time. So this is simply like a bink, like a fast shutter of maybe a blurry shutter of a dance, you know. But again, I guess I did it because, why did I do it? Something about when I drew it, it became this goddess of dance. I don't know why. And then it kind of fit the theme in a way that's supposed to be going on as the model as goddess. And I do want to say a couple things. I want to apologize to all of the models that are not in this. And including my wife at one point said, well, there was supposed to be no males in it. And, well, but I brought one in today. This is Michael. And this is Michael that's a little bit got a Cubist kind of background thing going on. Okay? And I have some that, again, this is kind of a studio thing, but to me, all the angles and things that in the studio just started to become part of the composition. And that's a different thing about me. I have trouble doing a portrait. To me, that's like I don't know how I did that. That was done 8 years ago, and the only reason I guess I could do it is because I had fun with the palette. But portraits are hard for me because my mind doesn't. That's the controlling part that I'm trying to get away from. When I stepped away from art for a while on purpose because I thought it would get me in trouble. If I did art, I might try that as a career, and that'd be terrible. And so I decided I could do something that anybody could do, and that'd be a social science teacher like David here. Okay, I mean, if David and I can do it, then if you needed another career, then I suggest history, sociology.
So this one here the face looks like it's a mask.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, a mask. Well, it could be.
It's got very fine line, and the hair comes out from behind something.
Yeah, I can see that. I see what you're saying. It wasn't with intent. That's just my whole point. I very seldom work with intent. But when one of the reasons I stepped away from art too was I was frustrated because I was trying to be perfect. I didn't allow myself to have a little more freedom, I guess. And the other thing, again, as I said, is I decided it was a bad career path. What little art history I knew was like scary, and it still is, unfortunately. I mean, okay.
So you have a
All
lot
right.
of paintings. How prolific are you? How much?
Well, if you saw my so-called studio, it's a warehouse, a pretty large part of my basement. It's a pretty decent part. Okay, this one. This one is my Cuban influence, for one thing. I have a favorite Cuban artist who worked with Picasso and those people, and is now the national artist of Cuba. His name is Wilfredo Long, and his father was Chinese, and his mother was Haitian, and but born in Cuba, and studied and worked in Paris a lot. But then finally, in the later years, well after the revolution, went back. And so I went to Cuba on an art trip. I'm going again with my wife this time in January. We're going to Cuba. But I find Cuba, one of the things I like about Cuba is another one of my kind of theories about the cosmos again. If we look in here, we have human form, we have vegetation, supposedly we have sunlight, supposed to be brighter at the top and darker at the bottom, and as in a jungle. And part of the theme sometimes of Latin art is a spirituality, and maybe other than ours being controlled religious spirituality, I think they have a lot more spirituality and contact with nature. So I've got birds in here. Where's the bird? I don't know, maybe this guy. Oh, there's a bird. And kind of a panther, and a lot of fruit again. Lots of fruit. There's some anatomical things going on in there. And sometimes plants become people and people become plants. And again, that's part of their spirituality and part of, apparently, the Haitian in itself, the voodoo nature. Voodoo has a lot of naturalism and a lot of nature. And it's in Lam's paintings.
But why
And
the baseball?
again, these papayas have faces, you know. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Why the baseball?
Oh, good point. Great.
Cuba.
Well, when I was in Cuba, the World Series was going on, and I would go to the bar at night and sit with the Cubans and talk baseball. And so, yeah, so that's why it's in there. This is a little bit of my kind of Cuban memory, a little bit. And it's got bananas in here, and it's also got some insects. Some of those insects we find on milkweed, by the way. This one, it's got like the dual symmetry head thing. You can't tell which is the head and which is the tail type thing. Some fish have too. Yeah, there's I wrote a little thing for this at one point that talked about the voodoo that you do and I do and we all do as part of the universe. You know, so this is a small piece of the universe, and this is a very healthy piece. So this is kind of like optimistic about humans and animals and the inanimate elements and the sun and all these things kind of working out a nice cooperative arrangement that's a win-win or win-win-win-win-wins. So a lot of eco things. And hopefully nature can figure out some of the variables that we've thrown at it. Good point, Todd.
Does anybody else have questions for Paul? We have just a few minutes left here. Is there anybody else that's wondering about anything?
So do you finish these in the classroom here? Do you take them home and finish them? Is it a immediate, you're done and you walk away?
Well,
or?
my wife says I should be doing more at home, but I keep saying I don't have any room. Everything's just like all my materials and my canvases, I try to have a supply of unused, and then I have just canvases I try to keep in a certain order so I can maybe find something, and I try to catalog it, but I'm not real good about that, but I try from time to time. So, but some of these pieces I do them on a short-term basis. That one I actually spent quite a bit of several sessions on. I sometimes probably painted it on in Susan's class, and sometimes I painted it outside Susan's class because it was crowded or something. And I forget what all. Oh, the other part of this, it was originally a sketch, and it's in here somewhere, perhaps. I've got some sketchbook things. Some sketchbook, well, it was kind of impractical to carry all the sketchbooks in, but I did have like a couple pieces that kind of jumped in my head, and I think that sketch I was sitting in a rocking Adirondack. I have a place up at Lake Erie, and I was sitting in there with one of the few breaks I gave myself, and it just kind of happened without, I don't know that I had any intent, it just kind of went there.
While he's looking for that, Susan, since you were his instructor, do you have any insights or secret stories you want to tell people?
Uh-oh. We can pass this around. So this is a copy of that, kind of in my sketchbook. Although it sometimes doesn't go, you'll see that some things changed. This is one outside. This is a sketch from one outside with the top cut off. This one's a little better.
Do you frequently sketch them ahead of time, or a lot of them just start on canvas?
Most of them just start, but sometimes, occasionally I like if I'm up there, I don't paint up at the island, but I sketch sometimes, and then I come back and then I transfer it. You know, so this is another one. This one I just wanted to mention. This is science prone in a way. It's a body contorted into a cube, and it's out here. And I comment on the fact that going back to the cosmos being 92 billion light years across. We supposedly, the universe, astrophysicists and some of the other people whose job it is to do this, to look at quantum physics and string theory and all this, like Walter Wadham used to work here, who was also Walter, who painted here, was in the Manhattan Project. And Walter, when he died, donated a big gift to us to help boost the model pay. But anyway, this is talked about. It's a cube inside 26 or 27 dimensions that have been identified. Okay, so there's all these different dimensions. We exist in, primarily our perception is in a three-dimensional world, but most of the three-dimensional part probably works for us, at least most of the time. Most of the time. But in these 26 dimensions, it starts getting a lot more complicated. And it's almost theory. And the problem with theory is it's just like real life. In real life, we can try to be a good person and do a bunch of stuff, but it doesn't guarantee we're going to be rewarded for it. Kind of works that way a little bit with math. I used to think that math, all the equations are supposed to equal, not in real life, not even real math. The more we study real math, the more it's like, no, they don't. That's a nice myth that things always balance out. Okay?
Paul, thank you very much. What a wonderful time. Guys, don't forget to check out Paul's show out here in the